I don't speak Italian, but I can speak two words, Fangio Verde, and I don't exactly know what it means other than to say perhaps the most beautiful shade of green I've seen on a car in a very long time. This is Out Motorsports, the channel for cars as you are. My name is Jake, and I'm here with the newest Alfa Romeo, the 2024 Alfa Romeo Tonale. This is a pretty big deal for the Alfa Romeo brand. They've been in the US for a while, kind of as the rebirth with the Giulia, the Stelvio, but they've needed something that felt a little more modern and appealed to another type of consumer. So this is the Tonale. It is a smaller vehicle. This is a subcompact crossover that kind of competes with things like the BMW X1, the Volvo XC40, the Mercedes-Benz GLA. It's fairly small dimensionally, but the other big thing here is that it is the first electrified vehicle for the Alfa Romeo brand. Every Tonale that is going to be on sale here is a plug-in hybrid. So it's not quite a quadrifoglio, but it is going to be a different kind of performance. I think it's one that's very important for the brand because Alfa has also said that after this, every new Alfa Romeo is going to be fully electric. So, of course, a lot of automakers say things like that. Very curious to see how that pans out, but let's talk about the Tonale because this is a very big deal. So the first thing to talk about with the Tonale is how it's powered. Like I said, it's a plug-in hybrid, but this whole setup shares something with the Chevy Corvette E-Ray of all vehicles, and that is the fact that the front axle and the rear axle are completely powered independently of each other. So up here at the front, you have a 1.3 liter turbocharged 3-cylinder engine making about 180 horsepower. That is driving only the front wheels, and it is running through a 6-speed torque converter automatic transmission. Now when you move to the back of the Tonale, that is where your electric motor is going to be found. That makes another 121 horsepower and only drives the rear wheels. There's no drive shaft in between, the transmission does not connect back here, it is completely independent, just controlled by a computer. Now total power output here is going to be 285 horsepower and 347 pound-feet of torque. That is of course if both drivetrains are pushing power to all four wheels at the same time. Now that's only going to happen when the car deems it's necessary in its normal day-to-day operation, or if you're using the dynamic drive mode that kind of forces it to be as sporty as possible, thus as powerful as possible, or if the car detects wheel spin and decides that it needs to use all-wheel drive, i.e. use both sets of motors to make this thing move. Now, as far as range is concerned, being a PHEV, these are not going to be full EVs that can go hundreds of miles on a charge, but this is pretty good. It will do about 33 miles on a battery charge if you're driving it solely on electric power alone. Now, if you let the car do its own thing as a hybrid, of course, you've got hundreds of miles of range because it's just going to be like any other Prius-y hybrid that you've driven before. And then, of course, being an Alfa Romeo, they've got performance baked in, or at least so they say, and that starts with the suspension and carries on to the brakes. So there are two different suspension options going on here, both of which are going to be a dual mode setup, so they're all going to be considered adaptive dampers, but this one being the Veloce, this is the highest trim level with the most performance-oriented shocks. And this is going to be a Morelli setup that is a dual frequency shock, so it's got kind of a stiff mode and a soft mode, and that of course applies to front and rear axles. Now on the front axle in particular, for the sake of stopping power, you do have Brembo 4-piston calipers down here, and then some single piston calipers out back. Obviously the front calipers do the majority of the work on every vehicle, so nice to have these upsized. Now this being the Veloce, this also has the upsized 20-inch wheels. It's a lot of wheel for a car this size, and if you want a similar wheel style but a little more sidewall for city comfort, you can get a very similar style as a 19 on other trim levels of the Tonale. Now this being a brand new car, I figure everyone would want to see the interior a little bit, so let's take a quick tour. It's going to be fairly similar to other Alfas that you've seen if you have, but there's going to be a few differences obviously because this is a new car. So let's go ahead and hop inside here. Shut that door. Your steering wheel is going to be pretty similar to every other Alfa that you've probably seen. It's got a little nice sound when you close the door there. Now I want you to listen to the startup sound when I start this because I think it is interesting and I also think it is a little too loud. So I'm going to go ahead and put my foot on the brake, hit the start button, which is on the steering wheel. Tell me what you think in the comments here. I just don't love that extra little high note. I think it's a little much, but in any case, it's a nit to pick. Some of y'all know that I like to do that, but let's take a tour of the rest of this thing. So now that we've got the car turned on, you'll see the gauge cluster here is fully digital. There's a couple different themes you can go through. This is kind of the more retro looking one. Now, you can pick a few different options for the middle of the cluster here if you want messages, driver assistance, you know, performance screens, whatever. I like being able to see kind of the state of charge and power or the hybrid operation just because, you know, it's fun to play games with hybrids. Now over here, you'll notice you've got both a state of charge indicator here for the battery, and then you've got your fuel gauge over here as well. So nice, you can keep an eye on both, and then it shows your estimated range, both combined and separate. So that is that. Now, if we head over to the UConnect screen, this is UConnect 5. So this is the newest version of UConnect. This is going to be the biggest difference between this Alpha and some prior model year Alphas that people have driven before. So in this case, it's UConnect 5. Obviously, there's wireless CarPlay and Android Auto here, but if you go back to the home screen, you have a lot of different pages you can look at here, and especially this vehicle screen, you can look at different hybrid modes in particular. So this will show you different things, let you pick settings for the battery charge, all of that. You can see power flow. Just kind of nice to have all this. And then the controls themselves are fairly snappy. So the screen is good, but then I also love the fact that they kept physical controls for the climate control. I think this is something that is really underrated because it's really tough to use touchscreens while you're on the move. So this is a very, very nice touch. In this case, you've got dual zone climate control here. Now, the one thing I don't love, this car does have heated and ventilated seats and a heated steering wheel, but you have to activate those from the touch screen. So don't love that, but obviously they only had so much space for buttons, so they did what they could. Now looking further down here, you do have some charging ports. You've got USB-A and USB-C. You've got a 12-volt socket here, and then a wireless charging mat on this car being a Veloce. And then to the left of the charging mat and everything, this is going to be the drive mode selector. This is in other Alphas as well, but it does different things in the Tonale because this is a hybrid. So the N mode is your default. That's for what they call natural driving. That's going to be for kind of default hybrid operation. It's going to run as an EV when it can, but it'll also bring the gas motor on as needed, just kind of doing its own thing. If you click it down to A, that is advanced efficiency, and that is going to prioritize electric only operation unless you really, really mat the throttle. So you can hit the kickdown switch and it will turn on the gas engine, but only if you do that. Otherwise, it's going to be 100% EV all the time until the battery is drained. Then it will go back to running like a hybrid. Now, the final option here is D for dynamics. So if we click up and then click up again, I'm sure you noticed the gasoline engine kicked itself on right there, and you can see the shock absorber icon went red here. So this is in the full dynamic setting, and that prioritizes power like I mentioned. So that's going to be your full performance version. It's going to keep the gas engine running the whole time. You can also hit the shock button and it will turn the shocks back to soft. So if you want, you know, max power and everything otherwise, but the shocks in soft, you can certainly do that. And then you also got your ESC off mode here, which you have to be in dynamic mode for, and if you just twist and hold, it will turn your stability control off as well. Now I'm just going to twist and hold back and go back to N. And then you hear, as soon as I did, because the car still has a good bit of charge on it, it went right back to being a full EV for the time being. And then looking further back here, you've got a pretty typical transmission selector for the 6-speed automatic. So you've got just park through drive, and then you've got a manual shift gate over here. As soon as you kick it over here, it's going to kick on that gas engine. If I put it back over, it will let the gas motor turn back off. Looking over on the right of that, this is your volume control for the sound system, which is kind of a nice touch. It's knurled, but it's plastic, not metal. And then your parking brake. Now further back here, you've got a couple things for your parking assistance and parking sonar sensors, but more importantly, you've got the e-save button. So this can do two different things. This can either make the gas engine run and charge the car up to a certain determined percentage, or it can keep the battery where it's at right now. So the whole point of that is basically if you're commuting into a city where they require you to drive in electric mode only. This is something that we're not seeing in the United States, but in Europe they do this, or they charge some sort of toll effectively if you're driving a gas-powered car into the city. So what you can do there is hit the e-save button and make sure that when you get into that environment, you've got 100% state of charge, giving you that 30-some miles of full EV range. Or if you're driving on the interstate, let's say, and you realize that the battery is at a pretty low state of charge, you can push e-save and the engine will run just a little bit harder. It will, of course, give you a hit to your MPG. It'll run a little bit harder though, and it will charge the battery back to whatever percentage you've asked for, 80, 90, 100%. So that button can do two different things. You configure it in the UConnect screen, but it's nice that they give you the option. And then looking further down here, you've just got two cup holders, pretty typical. I've got the key in one of them. This is the typical Alfa Romeo key that we're seeing lately. So it's kind of a nice key, a little bit big, but I don't mind it. It's stylish, if nothing else. Two cup holders, and then you've got a few things in a very small armrest right there. Now there is ambient lighting. It does light up kind of this whole silver bit that runs behind the screen, and then over on the other side of the dash, you can pick a few different colors there. This one has a fairly large sunroof. I don't know if I'd call it panoramic, but it is pretty large, and it does open up, so that is indeed quite nice. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is the back seat of this car, because in theory, this actually has more room inside in certain ways than the Stelvio, which is physically bigger, but I don't know how comfortable I am behind myself. So let's talk about the back seat. So if we head to the back seat of the Tonale, I'm gonna sit behind myself because I have the seat set for my 6'1" frame. Go ahead and move my other things over here. Now, legroom wise, this is actually great. This is really, really good. I think you can see that there. I've got plenty of legroom for how small this is. My knees are, you know, barely touching the seat back, but it's generally fine. I've got foot room if you look down here, and actually I've got pretty good thigh support too. So this is all fine. Where I have less of a great time is with my headroom. Now I have headroom here, but I have tall hair. So that's kind of the problem here. The roof is sculpted back here, so I do have headroom, but this is all just barely enough. I would like a touch more headroom, and that would make me feel a little more comfortable in the back seat of this car. Now, all that to say, for most people doing most things, if you're not putting 6-footers back here regularly, it's going to be totally fine. And there is an armrest right here in between the seats with a couple more cup holders, so that's nice to have. And then looking down toward the center console, you do have rear air vents, which again is lovely. And you've got two more charging ports, another USB-A and USB-C. Okay, so first let's talk about the pure EV driving mode. And the biggest thing here is that for lower speed stuff, like in a city sort of environment, the pure electric drive mode is plenty as far as torque and horsepower concerned. You don't need more. You're not going to want for more, even shoot gaps in traffic and that sort of thing. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put it in A because that forces it to stay in electric mode while I accelerate here. So I'm going to go ahead and put my foot in it, but not hit the kick down. 0 to 60 here is a little over 11 seconds, I think. And, you know, is it fast? No, there's 60 right there. It's not fast, but no plug-in hybrid is going to be. But around town, in a city environment, it's going to be more than enough. Go ahead and click it back to N because that will run the gas motor as needed. In both of these modes, the shocks are at soft, the steering is at its lighter setting, everything is more conventional feeling. And in these cases, I think the Tonale feels just like any other car. It's pretty pleasant. I wouldn't say you notice anything especially sporty about it. And then over these bumps, it is riding pretty nicely with the shocks in their softer setting. I think everything is fairly comfortable here. The one thing comfort-wise up front that I just would love is if the driver's seat sat about an inch or so lower. I feel like my head is just really close to being right in the roof, and I've got a decent driving position here, but I just wish I sat a touch lower just for the ultimate in comfort. Now I've put this back to the N mode, which means it's going to operate like a hybrid, so if I call for full power, it's going to kick on the gas engine. So let me go ahead and do that. Gas motor's on now. Acceleration obviously is much more rapid, but it doesn't really add any sound, which is nice. If it comes on at city speeds, I've noticed it is a bit louder. You get a little more vibration going on there. That is where you notice that this is potentially going to be more of a hybrid setup. And that's only really happened when the battery's been at 0 miles of indicated range because it doesn't have a lot to give. It's acting truly like a very Prius-y style hybrid at that point. But otherwise, you know, it's picking the right gear for the transmission and everything is just pretty hunky-dory. Now, a little quick word about the steering in this car. Other Alfas that I've driven recently have been kind of quick and darty with their steering in a way that I've almost felt was too much, but it also gives the car a lot of character. It gives it this feeling of being very eager to turn in, and this doesn't have that. This feels a lot more regular in its steering, for lack of a better term. It's not quite as darty feeling, it's not quite as quick. It's not to say it's bad steering, it's just a little lifeless compared to what I'm used to from an Alfa Romeo. I'm gonna go ahead and put this into D for dynamic because I wanna talk about how this performs when you've got everything in that full attack mode. Not like most people are gonna drive this that way all the time, but let's talk about it. So the shocks are at full stiff, the engine is running, everything is less about efficiency here and more about performance. And if I put my foot in here, that feels pretty quick. And obviously your 0 to 60 time is cut down, your performance overall is amped up. Alfa says that you need over 80% state of charge on the battery to get the most performance out of the car, which makes total sense. But if you're not driving around with 80% battery all the time and you're not looking to drag race everybody, this is still going to feel plenty fast. And obviously, the car will keep the state of charge where it needs to be if you've got it in e-save, or if it's in dynamic, it's just going to do its own thing. And I've got an opportunity for a full throttle acceleration, so we'll go ahead and do it. You get the teeniest little bit of torque steer because remember, the front wheels are decoupled from the rear, so you don't have all-wheel drive to really help you out in the traditional sense. The steering does firm up here, although it doesn't really regain that darty feeling. It's still feeling the same way, just with a heavier weight to the wheel. Now, I talk a lot about the steering because, like I said, it's kind of been an Alfa thing, but it's got good enough feedback from a where are my wheels pointed perspective. I don't feel like that needs to be better. It's just how they've got it tuned for turn-in is the only thing that I'm kind of feeling a little on. But like I said, it's not bad. It's just compared to other Alfas I've driven. Now, one other thing to talk about with the dynamic mode that I think is super interesting is in the braking. So I mentioned the car doesn't do regen braking like you would traditionally expect from an EV in the normal mode, natural mode rather, or the advanced efficiency mode. But if you have it in dynamic mode, the interesting thing here is that it will actually regen brake fairly aggressively if you lift throttle completely or even part way. So I think Alfa's done this because they want it to feel a little sportier, and having the car regen actually kind of helps rotate the car a little bit. It's very interesting, but if I lift throttle here, it is slowing down pretty aggressively. It'll drop 10 or 15 miles an hour pretty easily, and it shows you on the center gauge cluster that it is dumping juice back into the battery there. It's not just, in a lower gear doing nothing. So kind of neat. And then the only other thing to mention with driving and comforting here is the paddle shifters. And I mentioned it as part of the comfort talk because these control only the 6-speed transmission that drives the front wheels. They're not, doing anything to do regen or whatever else. They're gigantic, they're made out of metal. It's kind of an Alfa hallmark at this point, which is lovely. However, they also make you reach very far for the turn signal and wiper stalks. And I have big hands, and I can barely reach if my hands are at 9 and 3. I'm using my middle fingers, and they are about as far extended as they go. So that's all I've got there. If you have smaller hands, regardless of gender, you might have a tougher time there. So something to consider. Obviously, Alfa has determined that this is a priority, and they want to have those shifters there for all the backroads driving you do in your Tonale. All right, and that is it for this review of the 2024 Alfa Romeo Tonale Veloce. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe right here on YouTube. Give us a follow on all of the other socials that you can find us on. If you'd like to meet fellow LGBT automotive enthusiasts and motorsports competitors, head over to outmotorsports.com. We've got a whole gaggle of people over there that would love to be your best friend and meet you at some events in person and online. Until next time, please stay safe, be well, see you again soon.